Hi there. In this tutorial I'm going to go ahead and sculpt an elephant. Walk you through the process of doing kind of a larger project. So I've got some elephant ref here. And the reference is just some images I collected from Google. So I've got a front view, a side view, a 3/4 view, just another side view. Sort of like, I have two side views here because I kind of think there's a little more information about the head here and some feet. So, oh, and there's a back. So I don't have a top view, but I'll do my best to try to figure it out based on the lighting that I'm seeing here. And I think it shouldn't be too difficult to work out. So, go ahead and drop that to the canvas. And I'm going to start with the Z-sphere. So with this project, it's really, really important that you maintain your symmetry. And the Z-sphere, I usually like to put kind of right here on the body. So everything is going to come off of this first Z-sphere. It isn't going to be like the end of the trunk or whatever. So, and the simpler the better here. So I'm going to go ahead and, this is my front to back axis. So we'll go ahead and put the Z-sphere here for the head. And a couple Z-spheres for the ears, and then one starting the trunk and then another one to give it some length. And again, it just does not need to be detailed at all. Like, that's going to be more than enough for the ears. The trunks I'm going to append as a separate subtool down the road a little bit. So we'll just keep on. I'll go ahead and switch to this other material. Keep moving on. So that's going to be where the shoulders go. So I'll just scoot that back, and I've got symmetry on, so when I move it, it's going to move down the center line. So that shoulder's a little bit higher back there. And I'll go ahead and put a little starting point so that I can grow these out, and then these can be the actual arms. And looks like they're going to kind of bend forward like elbows, so I'll tilt it back just a notch. Again, not at all necessary to get this exactly right, or really even kind of close to right. It just doesn't matter. You just need to have like the basic geometry here so that you can sculpt it. So we'll go ahead and do kind of one for the middle here, and I'll scale it up. I'm just doing W, E, and R to move through my hotkeys here, and if you mouse over you can see what the hotkey is. So there's W, E, and R. And I notice here when I scaled this up, I got a little issue there, and what that is Zbrush is telling me that it doesn't really know how to solve for these, so I'm just going to move them out. So once I do that, it gets a little bit more space, and it's pretty happy about that. So that might be a little bit on the big side. You can see there's kind of a downward slope there, so I don't have to go too high with that. So back to draw mode, Q, and I'll draw some starters there, and then thighs. So when you're doing this, it's useful to try to give yourself a little bit of space between the legs there. I think that looks probably okay. And again, obviously the proportions are just totally screwy right now, but it doesn't matter. And we'll come over here and do the feet. And because he doesn't really have articulated toes, that's going to be more than enough. But I want to make sure that I come in and add something there for the tail. So we'll just do this the same way, give it a little starting point and then something that comes off. And for the ears, I might just, kind of pull them out a little bit. So that can be my starting Z-sphere mesh. If I turn perspective on, you get a little better look on it. And again, everything is symmetrical. In fact, I think I might just go ahead and turn perspective off and try to line the legs up a little bit better. So if at this point you discover that you have broken symmetry, I would just really recommend starting over again, because you're not going to lose that much work and you're going to save yourself a bunch of headache. So just making some real rough adjustments here. And if I hit A, you can see the space mesh. If I turn polyframe on by Shift F, take a look at it. I'm going to make sure I've got So I've got a center line along the top, but it gets kind of screwed up here, so I want to make sure that I don't ruin that, so I'm actually going to maybe just scoot these down, and it kind of, yeah, see, just that little adjustment made it so that I could figure it out. It's still screwed up down there, so I think the issue is these are just a little bit too close together. So I'll give them some breathing room. Great. So the reason you want that center line is so it can easily maintain symmetry. A little bit of a pinching there, and so to adjust for that, I'm actually just going to bring that out there so it's nice and clean. Again, it doesn't really matter what the proportions are, you just want to make sure that you've got kind of enough starting geo so that you can do the sculpting. So from this, hopefully, we'll get to something like this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Make Polymesh 3D. So now this is an editable poly, and I am going to turn symmetry on because each new subtool is going to have its own settings. And we can start looking at some of the scale stuff here. So maybe I'll just kind of look down here. So I'm going to grab the move brush, and the head's going to be bigger. So I'm just going to start looking at these lines. Obviously that's way too big, so I'm using the move brush there. He's got this great big belly. And these nice big arms. Whoops. So just the move brush at this point. So this is an area where it's gonna be maybe a little bit tricky. The temptation might be to come in and do sort of a clay tubes thing, but what you can end up with is some potential crashing or intersecting there, and because I forgot to actually turn the intensity down there a little bit. So you want to make sure that you don't run into that situation. So this can be a lot of kind of moving without doing a lot, and smoothing without doing a lot of actual sculpting. And there's all kinds of little stuff happening in there. I'm not going to worry about that too much. I just want to make sure that I've got kind of the right place for that lower end of the abdomen to be sort of moving up in there without real deep armpits. That's kind of what I'm looking at there. So I'm going to make sure I come in and I'll give this one subdivision. And just going to stick to the move brush for this stuff. Just want a nice smooth transition from the arms into the legs. I'm sorry, from the legs into the body. Okay, so now let's add some volume to the head here. I'm going to drop it back down again, still just using move. And kind of looking at that silhouette. So the ears, which you're going to want to do, you can see how wide that head is, for the ears, is model them kind of coming out sideways. And the reason for that is it's much easier to model them coming out sideways than if they're flat up against the head, even though they can totally do that. They can be rotated all over the place. It's really hard to model like inside the inside surface of that. So if you just leave it out a little bit, that'll make your life a lot easier. It doesn't have to be perfectly perpendicular to the head there, but so I'm just kind of going to pull that down, and still kind of a definitely big block out phase at this point. So kind of looking at that big sway back he's got, and a little butt's kind of round there. So I'm not going to sculpt him walking. I'll go ahead and sculpt him. I guess it could be a her. Standing still, and then once the model is done, if I wanted to, I could go back in and pose the low poly, and that would be a much more time-saving strategy, because then I don't have to retopologize a posed mesh, and I get to maintain that, or use the advantage of symmetry. So I'll turn perspective back on, and go up to that second subdivision I already added in. So still just using the move brush here. Let me do another subdivision. So there's all this kind of face here, and then the ears happen. So I don't really have any face, but I kind of like the current position of the ears starting at the end of the neck. So I want to make sure that I leave space for the neck there, because even though it's a little bit tricky to see, they've obviously got a neck in there. So what I'm going to do is grab my clay tubes brush, and my intensity has already been reduced, and just pull some volume out there. Maybe even switch to the move brush, and obviously the trunk's going to need to come along. Clay tubes to do a little negative there. Now when you're working on something, a thinner surface like this ear, you want to make sure that you are aware of the back face masking feature. I discussed that in a few previous videos, but that is going to live here in brush, auto masking, and then backface mask. So if you don't have this UI, you can go ahead and track it down. Very, very useful. So again, I'm just using the clay tubes here, because if you look at the side of the elephant, there really isn't a lot of separation between the upper arm and the body. So I kind of want to make sure that I begin to kind of bake that in. Same deal here. Now one of the nice things about keeping this as a mesh that is the result of Z-spheres is, if I want to, I can very easily come in and turn the it'll make it easier to work, or easier to see what's going on if I turn polyframe on, but I can just hide stuff. So if I hold Control and Shift and click on an area, it will isolate that subtool, I'm sorry, that's polygroup, which is sourced from each Z-sphere, so each Z-sphere is going to have its own polygroup. So if I want, I can isolate something or hide something, and the way that you hide it is by holding Control and Shift and then dragging out. Sorry, that's inverting the selection, so that the drag out is the invert, and then clicking will show anything that's hidden. So that is pretty basic stuff. Hopefully most of you guys have seen that, but just in case you need a refresher, there you go. So looking at it from the back, they've got these kind of big legs here, at the top anyway, but they're sort of, so there's like round form, and the legs kind of just poke off almost at a tangent. So I want to make sure that the stuff feels about right. So it's going to be mostly, you can see there's a little bit of extra stuff going on there, but I think the legs are pretty tight in the back. So we'll fill that volume in. So just using that clay tubes. And you can see how low the tail goes, at least on this one. Tail's pretty low there. And I've got the tail sitting pretty high, so I think in this case what I'm going to do is go to the masking brush and switch to the mask lasso. And I'll just grab that, blur it a bit, and then using transpose, just go ahead and kind of scoot that down a little bit, maybe just the regular move brush. Okay, so still need to come out a lot farther here with the head, so I think I'll use the same trick. Just pull it out. And the arms here are looking pretty skinny. So, but I kind of want to make sure that I don't, if I just pull it out, it's going to squish this stuff in. But I guess I can come in and just add some more volume back in there. So I will do that. So we'll use magnify here. And I think I'm actually going to turn the intensity on my magnify down a little bit. So I get a little bit nervous using magnify and or inflate. You can kind of see how much of that sort of collapsy space in there it was prepared to give me. So that is the thing that's really going to cause trouble. You want to make sure you don't end up in a scenario where that stuff is pinched. So clay tube, smooth it back, and you can see it's wanting to pinch in there. So you just kind of got to get up in there and build it slowly. And it's possible that if I had, you know, changed the arrangement of the Z-spheres, I wouldn't have run into that situation, but it happens all the time, so no big deal. It's pretty easy to handle. You just got to be aware of it and kind of sculpt accordingly. So probably, let's see, one thing about those ears is it does really kind of conceal what's going on with the neck. I think I've got the whole head stuff here is kind of going out just a little bit too far. So this might be a good time to use this polygroup trick. So I'm going to go ahead and basically isolate the head, mask it, and then show everything. And I'm going to invert the mask and blur it a few times and scoot the stuff back. Well, you can see I got a little issue there. Whoops. So it needs to be blurred a bit more, and dropping it down a subdivision will help get that blur softened even further. And let's just kind of maybe nudge it back, and then we'll need to come in and with the shift key just relax some of that stuff. Alright, so now let's maybe add a little bit of volume under there and orient this whole trunk business kind of out a little bit. Sort of looking at the shape there. So the ears, you know what, I think these ears need to be more perpendicular than I had them originally. So same idea here, just going to go ahead and I'm doing some stuff here pretty quickly. So I'll turn on the wireframe by Shift F. I'm going to Control and Shift down and then just click on the ears, which isolates them. And then I can mask them and then hold Control and Shift and click on the mesh. And then holding Control down, I'm going to invert the mask by clicking off the mesh. So basically isolating those ears. And I will just use my transpose tool here to rotate. Kind of pull them forward and out a bit. Alright, so they need to be a little bit thinner, obviously, so I'm going to use pinch. And just kind of go around. I don't want them ever to be paper thin, but thinner than that is going to be ideal. And then I want to push them into the back, so I'm going to use Dan Standard. Turn Lazy Mouse on, give it some lazy radius, something in the neighborhood of 30-ish. And that number is just going to kind of dictate how long that red line is, which is what does the historic averaging. So you can see this connection here. Maybe we can get scoot back a bit. And just big adjustments. Turn perspective on. So let's get it from the front here. So you can start to see some of these angles coming in. You see how much higher the back goes than the head. You can really see it up there. That's those shoulders, and they are giant. So let's go ahead, and they're really pretty high up too. So kind of put them there, and then because this is the shoulder, the forearm kind of needs to be under there. So I'm going to go ahead and use my clay toothbrush to just fill that stuff in. And I'm actually going to move this stuff back a little bit, not so much with the ear. There's actually a variant on the move brush called Move Topological, which I can get to by hitting M, and you'll see it right here. And what it does is it looks at the distance in the geometry from where you're clicking to all of the things that are inside your brushstroke, and it will you know, add a fall off as stuff goes out. So the farther away something is, it's really useful if you're messing with fingers. You can sort of play with one finger without altering another one. So, you know, considering we started there, making some progress here. Alright, so now looking at it, we still can't really get enough of that shoulder, so I'm going to pull it up just a little bit further and come down to clay tubes. And we'll just kind of fill that stuff in. And now let's come and look at our reference here. So I'm thinking the whole elephant just needs to get a little bit longer towards the back. So go to my lowest subdivision and we'll just move it back. And I think the whole thing also kind of needs to get a little bit lower in the back, so we'll do that same thing, except I'm going to start my pivot from the foot now, holding the shift key and just kind of scoot down a little bit. So that may or may not be what we're looking for, but I'm going to go back to the regular move brush now, just to make sure I don't have any surprises in how the behavior is. So look at it from the back, I think he's actually got kind of like a little bow-legged thing, sort of looking there. And I'm going to kind of move these forward a little bit. And if I want to do this a little bit, sort of up the leg a bit, without having to worry about masking, I can just go ahead. This one's a little bit more tricky. So what I need to do is basically isolate all of these things. So I'm going to click on one, that'll isolate it alone, and then if I do a Control-Shift-Drag outside, that'll invert the selection, and then each additional time I click on a polygroup, it will just be hidden. So I don't know that I necessarily want to do that one. I think I'll leave that one there. So now I'm going to invert by holding Control and Shift and clicking. Sorry, I needed to drag. I'll go ahead and mask it. And then Control Shift click to show everything, and then Control click outside to invert that mask. And click on the geometry with Control to blur the mask. And just come over here and rotate these guys in a little bit. You're probably going to want to do something kind of similar for the front legs here. Although it's not quite as obvious that there's, like, you can see how close together the back legs are. They are really close. Sort of surprisingly so. Although I guess he's giant, so that changes things a little bit. But I'm gonna, maybe I'll keep the outside ones, the front legs, a little bit wider there. So now let's throw the old flatten 404 into the mix. Throw square alpha on there. And I'm going to do one more subdivision level so we can begin kind of calming these clay tubes marks down a bit. And I'm going to use the move brush here just to try to get a little bit of an, I guess there is actually kind of a pretty reasonable crevice in there in the armpit. So back to flatten. Start to find that big forearm there. And maybe I'll come over and look at this a bit. So I'm going to grab Dam Standard and maybe just kind of pencil, whoops, way too strong. Go to something like 15. Kind of begin to find where that, some of those structures are. And I am going to tilt the entire head up a little bit. So let's go down a couple subdivisions and throw the transpose in there and just rotate this up. And the trunk goes all the way down to the ground. So my trunk is way too short here. So I'll just use the move transpose, scale it down a bit. I guess scaling down isn't exactly the right way. Move it down. And it's getting a little bit on the flat side, so I'm going to smooth it out. That actually looks pretty nice. So now I can see I've got all this like extra stuff happening down here that's kind of missing, so I'll grab the clay tubes, roll back up. And I can't really see the bottom of the elephant, but I know he's got some pretty big jaws. So now I want to look at kind of where this ear stuff is happening. And it looks like it's pretty well embedded kind of behind this big, it's like going to be a big cheekbone structure thing here. If you've ever looked at an elephant skull, they are crazy. So I'm just kind of looking over here. Begin to throw some of those forms in, and I can see it's got this nice big kind of brow. So from the 3/4 view, I want to add enough so that I begin to see that stuff. 3/4 view is going to be really, really useful for this exact reason. It's hard to know exactly where how far that needs to come out, but perspective is going to help here. But if you can throw a little 3/4 on there, you can learn a lot. So begin to kind of fill in the trunk stuff. And you want to be real careful when you're dealing with the trunk with the clay tubes that you don't collapse it. And that's probably a little bit too much face, but it's okay. Kind of want to make a little bit more going on with the head. So I think I might move the ears, the starting point of the ears back a little bit. And maybe actually the whole head needs to go back. So I'm going to start this in the middle of the head and then use the move tool to just kind of scoot it back, and then I'm going to have some compression here in the neck area, but that should be okay. So back to flatten. I'm just going to settle some of that stuff down. Alright, so throw the pinch brush on here. Whoops, move. And they've got these big sort of thicker parts at the top. See that there and there and there. And I think that's the way they kind of flap them back and forth, so we want to make sure we maintain that. So I'll give it a little bit of a cut back there. But I want to make sure that the front cut preserves that stuff. And I can see there's maybe a roundness to that area there, so I'll just come in and throw some stuff in there with clay tubes. And because this is ultimately going to get kind of folded back, most likely, I'm not going to worry too much about the detail that's actually behind the ears. Also, I have no idea what an elephant neck looks like, so I'm not going to worry about that right now too much. I may look around and see if I can find some better reference, but maybe come over here with the dam standard. I can see there's a little bit of a dent there, so I'm going to make sure this is really a light stroke. Just kind of begin to put that stuff in. Got like a little round spot there. And I can see a little bit of a fold in that area. Some leg muscle type stuff maybe. And there's this kind of irregular line going up there, and I can sort of see it maybe even better from this side, get an idea of what the roundness is there for the abdomen. Something like that. I can kind of look over here and see that same stuff. So I'm using dam standard here to just kind of tighten that space up there. I can see kind of an elbow and on the back of a little tricep. I'm sure it's not little, it's gigantic. So we'll go ahead and begin to flatten the back of the forearm there a little bit. Maybe use clay tubes to add some volume in at that elbow. And I'm going to use clay tubes again just to kind of maybe give it a little that tapering there that's going on. So back to perspective, and I can see probably that head is too big. Kind of looks like that Sesame Street character. But it's all good. I'm going to use pinch here just to kind of make these all these features. Well, that's probably not right. Maybe I'll use move just a little bit smaller. Move the forehead stuff up, the top of the head down, looking for that flat spot there. So just using the move brush. Let's go to damn standard. I'm using the Alt button here just to kind of start drawing that stuff in. Clay 2 is actually probably better for this. Pretty wide. Whoa, I want to grab the move brush there. And the trunk is gonna, or the tusks I guess are gonna start sort of showing up right around here. So, you know, if you wanted to use either, you know, clay tubes or move, sometimes you get kind of the same result. If you're just trying to scoot some things, you know, off their normal a bit. So, anyway, that will be our progress for the first section. Stick around. We're gonna keep on sculpting.